My name is Ingrid. I am 34 years old, and the last time my entire family gathered in one room to openly laugh at me, my 8-year-old son brought the entire afternoon to a dead halt. It happened at my younger sister Nia's baby shower. The backyard was staged like an upscale catalogue, blush pink balloon arches framing the brick patio, an elaborate 3-tiered fondant cake on a marble pedestal, and 30 guests dressed in soft pastel tones. Nia stood on the lawn near the overflowing gift table, looked directly into my eyes across the crowd, and delivered a cruel, calculated line she had clearly spent all morning rehearsing. My mother, Carol, nodded in self-satisfied approval from the best seat on the patio, as if she had personally sanctioned the moment. Several of the guests clapped and laughed along like it was a well-timed punchline. Then Devon, my quiet, observant 8-year-old son, the boy they had pushed into a cheap metal folding chair near the drafty hallway so he would be out of the way, stood up on his own 2 feet and asked one simple, innocent question. The entire yard fell into a silence so absolute and suffocating that I could clearly hear the sound of melting ice cubes shifting inside the crystal punch bowl 30 feet away. But the explosion that shattered that party did not actually begin on that sunny afternoon. It began 6 weeks earlier, inside a dense stack of bank statements and financial ledger columns that simply refused to reconcile. To understand why my sister felt so comfortable humiliating me in front of 30 people, you have to understand the rigid, unforgiving hierarchy of my family. 6 years ago, when Devon was only 2 years old, my former husband packed his bags while I was out buying groceries and left a small yellow sticky note resting on our laminate kitchen counter. There was no argument, no tearful conversation, and no warning, just 4 cold words scrawled in black ballpoint ink. I can't do this. His cheap wedding band was left sitting right beside the toaster. For a full week afterward, Devon would wander over to the front storm door every few hours, pressing his small forehead against the cool glass, looking down the empty driveway waiting for a car that was never going to return. I would pull him into my lap, wipe his nose, and force a bright, cheerful laugh so he wouldn't realize his mother was falling apart at the seams. I did not have a career back then. I had half an unfinished bachelor's degree in accounting, an eviction notice hovering over my head, and a total checking account balance of exactly $340. I refused to collapse. I enrolled in night classes, studying advanced corporate taxation and auditing procedures while working part-time day shifts. I passed all 4 sections of the rigorous certified public accountant examination, with my toddler sleeping on a folded fleece blanket beneath my desk, simply because I could not afford to pay a babysitter past 9 o'clock at night. By the time I turned 29, I had taken a leap of faith and established my own independent forensic accounting practice, operating out of a small, drafty rented office located above a dry cleaner that perpetually smelled of steam and chemical lavender. By 34, through sheer discipline and relentless work, I had secured 11 regular corporate clients, built a savings buffer that put me 3 full years ahead on my residential mortgage, and raised a brilliant, kind-hearted son who could accurately name and describe every dinosaur that ever walked the earth. Yet none of that professional or personal resilience mattered in the eyes of my mother or my sister. To my mother, Carol, I was permanently branded as the flawed, broken daughter who lacked the basic feminine charm to keep a husband happy. To my sister, Nia, my life served as a convenient cautionary tale, living proof that she was the superior, more calculating sibling who had navigated adulthood correctly. Neither of them ever bothered to ask about the complex corporate fraud investigations I led. They never asked how Devon was performing in his 3rd grade classes. Every single family Thanksgiving, every Sunday dinner, and every phone call inevitably reduced my existence to the exact same crude arithmetic. Nia had secured a respectable, handsome husband, while Ingrid had failed and ended up alone. And in their narrow, suburban worldview, the math began and ended right there. For 6 long years, I absorbed their passive-aggressive digs in silence. I would smile through the dinner table lectures, pack my son into our car, drive home in the dark, and tell myself that their opinions held no real power over my life. But the truth is, it hurt deeply. My mother called my phone every Sunday afternoon at precisely 4 o'clock. The conversation never once began with an inquiry about my well-being. It was always a breathless monologue detailing Nia's latest triumphs, Nia's newly imported Italian kitchen backsplash, Nia's corporate promotion at the regional dental office, or the luxurious vacation that Nia's husband, Mike, had just booked for them in Hilton Head. If I mentioned that Devon had made the principal's honor roll, my mother would offer a flat, unenthusiastic, "That's nice, dear," before instantly steering the conversation back to her favorite subject. "Your sister just has such a wonderful life, Ingrid. She really figured it out." She said the words "figured it out" as though adult life were a simple combination lock that Nia had cracked effortlessly, while I had spent a decade stubbornly spinning the dial in the wrong direction. The underlying message was never subtle. Nia had married at 25, purchased a picture-perfect colonial house with an attached two-car garage, and followed the approved domestic script to perfection, while I was merely the messy rough draft my sister had learned to avoid. My mother summarized her philosophy during an Easter lunch 2 years ago, when Devon accidentally bumped his elbow against a glass of sweet tea, spilling it across the hardwood floor. As she knelt down with a paper towel, she looked up at me with an exhausted, theatrical sigh. "Your sister simply made smarter life choices, Ingrid. That is all there is to it." She said it as if stating a universal, scientific fact, like the weather or the law of gravity. I learned to hold my facial muscles completely rigid whenever those arrows were launched. Devon learned the exact same defense mechanism. Even as a small boy, he would go completely quiet, lean his small shoulder against my hip, and grip my cardigan sleeve with his tiny fist. He was only 8 years old, but he already possessed the painful emotional intelligence to recognize when a room full of adults had quietly turned hostile toward us. I should have spoken up years ago. I should have stood in the middle of my mother's polished kitchen and demanded that she never speak down to me in front of my child again. But I didn't. I carried their condescension, their judgment, and their petty comparisons on my shoulders because carrying heavy burdens had become my default setting. I was exceptionally good at enduring quietly. Nia was 7 months into her first pregnancy when my mother called to announce the baby shower. She did not extend a polite invitation, she issued an administrative directive. "We are hosting the shower in the backyard on the second Saturday of June," my mother stated briskly into the receiver. "I will need you at the house by 8 o'clock in the morning sharp to set up all 30 heavy folding chairs and help the caterers." I held the phone away from my ear, watching Devon quietly assemble a multicolored Lego suspension bridge on the living room rug. "So you need me to do the physical setup," I clarified evenly. "Well, someone has to do the heavy lifting, Ingrid," my mother replied with sharp annoyance. "Nia is carrying a child, she certainly cannot be lifting metal furniture." There was no offer of a guest invitation for me, and no initial mention of my son. When I explicitly asked if I should bring Devon along, my mother hesitated for 3 full seconds before letting out a reluctant breath. "I suppose you can bring him. Just make sure you keep him out of the way so he doesn't disrupt the flow of the party." Keep him out of the way. Her own 8-year-old grandson, treated like an inconvenient stray that needed to be penned in a corner. I swallowed the rising anger in my throat and replied with a quiet "okay," because that was what I always did. And then I sat in silence, feeling the bitter weight of that compliance settle in my chest like a jagged stone. To my mother and sister, Mike Dunning was the absolute crown jewel of the extended family. He was 36 years old, broad-shouldered, charismatic, and worked as a regional territory sales manager for a commercial building supply distributor. He made a grand show of bringing my mother expensive floral bouquets on her birthday, expertly grilled prime ribeye steaks at every family cookout, and affectionately called her Momsy with a charming, rehearsed wink. The entire family treated him like a magnificent trophy that Nia had earned for playing the game of life correctly. Nobody ever dared to question his exhausting travel schedule. Mike was out of town every other weekend, on what he vaguely described as regional territory development visits, claiming he was managing major industrial accounts scattered across neighboring states. Sometimes he would depart on a Friday afternoon and return late Sunday night. Other times he would leave on a Thursday morning and roll back into town on Monday, looking thoroughly drained and smelling faintly of a brand of hotel soap that Nia never stopped in their master bathroom. But nobody in the family ever blinked an eye. My mother praised his tireless corporate work ethic, and Nia proudly displayed his career on social media. I analyze complex financial balance sheets and forensic data for a living. I know down to my bones that when something looks too perfectly balanced, an underlying irregularity is usually being concealed. But for years, I deliberately pushed those analytical instincts down because questioning Mike's pristine reputation meant challenging my sister's happiness. And challenging Nia's happiness meant triggering another endless lecture from my mother about my own bitterness and jealousy. I watched the polished theater of Nia's life unfold from a safe distance. Their 3-bedroom colonial home on Birch Lane, the designer nursery she had been outfitting since her 12th week of pregnancy with sage green imported wallpaper, and a $900 solid wood crib. And the weekly social media updates showing Mike tenderly resting his hand against her baby bump with captions like counting down the days to our complete family. Yet beneath the glossy exterior, the practical details never sat right with me. Mike's sales territory seemed to expand in bizarre, erratic directions that made no geographical sense for a building supply representative. And there were personal moments of carelessness that revealed his true character. There was the afternoon when Devon waited on our front porch for 2 hours because Uncle Mike had promised to take him to a minor league baseball game, only for Mike to never show up or call. When Mike finally texted the following afternoon with a casual excuse about a flat tire on the highway, my 8-year-old son looked up at me with an empty, practiced expression and whispered, "It's okay, Mom. People get busy." It shattered my heart to see my little boy already learning how to normalize being forgotten by the men in his life. The entire facade began to crack open 5 weeks before the baby shower, and the catalyst was an ordinary afternoon favor. Nia had a high-risk prenatal appointment in the city, and my mother had insisted on accompanying her. Mike unexpectedly called my private cell phone, a rare occurrence, as he rarely spoke to me directly, and offered to pick Devon up from elementary school, take him out for ice cream, and watch him for the afternoon so I could finalize an urgent corporate tax audit for a commercial client. I initially felt a sharp hesitation in my gut, but when I saw Devon's face light up with genuine excitement at the prospect of spending time with his uncle, I reluctantly agreed. They were gone for nearly 4.5 hours. When Mike's heavy pickup truck pulled into my driveway at 6 o'clock, Devon hopped down from the passenger seat, his cheeks sticky with chocolate ice cream, clutching a small brown paper bag. "Uncle Mike bought me a surprise toy at the store, Mom." Devon beamed. I thanked Mike through the open truck window, watched him pull away, and then looked inside the paper bag. Sitting at the bottom was a small, bright red plastic race car, the chunky, rounded kind explicitly designed for toddlers. The cardboard backing clearly read, ages 2 to 4. I turned the toy over in my hands, confused. "Devon, why did Uncle Mike buy you a baby toy?" Devon shrugged casually, looking down at his sneakers. He grabbed 2 of them off the shelf at the gas station. "One was for me, and the other one was for..." He abruptly cut himself off, pressing his lips together tightly. "For who, sweetheart?" I asked gently. Devon looked away, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Uncle Mike told me I wasn't supposed to say anything. He said it was a private secret." I didn't interrogate him further that evening, but later that night, while carrying Devon's discarded denim jacket into the laundry room, a crumpled thermal receipt fell out of the front pocket. I smoothed the paper flat against the kitchen counter under the light. It was a fuel purchase from a convenience store located in the small township of Marbleton, a rural town situated 40 minutes east of our city, well past the county boundary. It was completely outside Mike's authorized commercial sales territory, and entirely in the opposite direction of any ice cream parlor Devon would ever visit. Beside the gasoline charge was a line item for a box of animal crackers, a toddler juice pouch, and 2 plastic toy cars. I stared at that receipt for 20 minutes in the quiet house, my forensic instincts flaring. Devon did not have a toddler cousin, and Nia was still 2 months away from delivering her baby. So whose child was eating animal crackers and playing with the second red race car in Marbleton? Over the next 2 weeks, I poured my nervous energy into knitting a baby blanket for my unborn niece. I had purchased several skeins of pale yellow organic cotton yarn, a soft, gentle shade that would feel warm against an infant's sensitive skin. I had originally taught myself how to knit from basic instructional videos years ago when Devon was an infant, back when my checking account was empty and I couldn't afford store-bought baby clothes. I sat cross-legged on my living room sofa late every night, after Devon fell asleep, working through rows of intricate stitches until my knuckles ached, using the rhythmic motion to process my rising anxiety. I knew perfectly well that the gift table at Nia's lavish shower would be covered in luxury designer items, $300 French swaddles, imported cashmere booties, and electronic nursery gadgets from high-end registries. I knew my simple, handmade blanket would look humble and inexpensive by comparison, but I kept knitting because I desperately wanted to offer my sister something created with genuine maternal love. The final confirmation of Mike's double life arrived 4 days before the scheduled shower. Mike sent me a frantic late-night text message asking for a professional favor. He claimed that he and Nia were attempting to refinance their primary mortgage on Birch Lane to secure a lower interest rate, and their underwriting bank was demanding 3 months of organized, reconciled banking statements. "You're the forensic numbers genius in the family, Ingrid," his message read. "Could you just take a quick professional glance at these PDF statements and make sure everything looks clean and balanced before I submit them to the loan officer?" He attached 3 months of digital bank statements for a secondary joint checking account. I should have declined the request and instructed him to hire an independent CPA. But a lingering, foolish part of me hoped that by helping him with his paperwork, my family might finally recognize my professional worth. I opened the financial files at 11 o'clock at night on my laptop, a mug of black coffee resting beside my mousepad. As I scrolled through the standard domestic transactions, grocery store visits, utility payments, and pharmacy copays, a recurring automated monthly electronic withdrawal immediately caught my eye. Every single month, on the precise 14th day, an automated transfer of exactly $1,450 was processed to a residential property management firm operating in Marbleton. 2 lines below that, another automated monthly payment of $620 was debited to Bright Horizons Early Learning Center, a licensed full-time childcare and preschool facility located on Elm Street in Marbleton. I sat completely motionless in my kitchen as the clock ticked past midnight. The rental property debits had been continuously active for 37 consecutive months, and the daycare tuition payments had been running for 31 months, meaning both financial obligations had originated long before Mike and Nia had even finalized their wedding plans. I cross-referenced the transaction dates with my memory of Mike's weekend sales territory trips. Every single month, on the day immediately preceding the automated rent draft, a corresponding cash deposit was transferred into that secondary account. Mike Dunning was not traveling to manage industrial accounts. He was systematically financing and maintaining an entire second household in a neighboring county on a financial schedule more reliable than his primary mortgage. 3 days before the baby shower, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place through my son. Mike had offered to take Devon to the neighborhood park for an hour, and when Devon returned home, he was unusually quiet and reflective. He sat on the edge of his bed, slowly unlacing his sneakers, before looking up at me with large, serious eyes. "Moms, can I tell you something that happened today?" he asked softly. "Of course you can tell me anything, Dev," I replied, sitting beside him. Devon took a deep breath. "Uncle Mike didn't take me to the park." He drove me to a small brick house in that town with the funny name. A lady with curly red hair answered the door, and Uncle Mike called her Sarah. She made us turkey sandwiches, and there was a little boy named Cody who is 3 years old. Cody showed me all his toy trucks in his bedroom. Uncle Mike told me that visiting them was a very special family surprise, and he made me promise not to tell anyone, especially Aunt Nia, because it would ruin the surprise. The following morning, while emptying Devon's school backpack to clean up a spilled juice box, I discovered a folded piece of yellow construction paper tucked between his homework folders. I opened it flat on the kitchen table. Drawn in bright crayons were 2 distinct houses separated by a long black road. The house on the left had a green roof and a stick figure woman with a round belly, labeled in clumsy 8-year-old print as Aunt Nia. The house on the right was drawn in orange crayon, featuring 3 figures standing on the front lawn, a tall man labeled Daddy Mike, a woman with red scribbles for hair labeled Aunt Sarah, and a tiny child holding a truck labeled Cody. Written across the top of the paper, in the exact block letters Devon had copied from the wooden mailbox on the street, was the physical address, 412 Elm Street, Marbleton. I pulled up the Public Property Assessment database for Marbleton on my computer terminal. The residential lease for 412 Elm Street was officially registered under the co-signed names of Michael Dunning and Sarah Dunning. The evidence was absolute, verified, and complete. My sister's picture-perfect marriage was an elaborate, funded illusion, and my 8-year-old son had innocently documented the entire truth in crayon. I carefully folded Devon's drawing, placed it securely inside the interior zippered pocket of my navy dress, and resolved to handle the devastating reality with the quiet, professional grace my family had never afforded me. The morning sun beat down heavily against the manicured lawn of my mother's backyard as Devon and I finished arranging the final row of white metal folding chairs. The property looked like a stage set constructed for a lifestyle commercial. Blush pink and metallic gold balloon garlands framed the patio doorway. A lavish 3-tiered vanilla sponge cake adorned with sugar roses sat upon a white marble pedestal, and rows of pristine party favors were lined up with mathematical precision. My mother had spent 2 hours criticizing the angle of the ribbons and adjusting the tablecloths, completely ignoring my presence except to bark out another physical task. Devon had stayed close to my side the entire morning, his small hand occasionally brushing against my navy dress, holding the tissue-wrapped yellow blanket under his arm like a priceless artifact. When the first wave of 30 invited guests began pouring through the wooden garden gate, dressed in coordinated pastel sundresses, clinking crystal mimosa flutes, and presenting wrapped boxes covered in expensive satin ribbons, my mother promptly directed Devon toward the metal folding chair situated near the back hallway entrance, instructing him once again to remain quiet and out of sight. I knelt down beside my son, gently straightened his crooked dinosaur necktie, and whispered that he was sitting right beside me at the main table, regardless of what anyone else decreed. By 10:30, Nia made her grand entrance onto the lawn wearing an exquisite off-the-shoulder white lace dress, one hand resting possessively over her 7-month pregnant belly, radiating the effortless confidence of a woman who believed the entire universe revolved around her domestic success. Mike walked immediately beside her, his broad arm wrapped tightly around her waist, flashing his practiced, charismatic salesman's smile to every admiring neighbor and co-worker who offered congratulations. When his eyes briefly caught mine across the lawn, his jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of cold panic flashing through his eyes before he smoothly masked it beneath a hearty laugh. The formal gift opening ceremony commenced shortly before noon around a massive, draped table groaning under the weight of luxury baby gear, high-end European strollers, cashmere swaddles, electronic monitoring systems, and designer nursery accessories from boutique registries. Nia opened each large present with theatrical gasps of delight, holding each item high for the cheering crowd while my mother beamed with overwhelming maternal pride. When Nia finally reached my gift at the far edge of the table, she pulled back the delicate tissue paper and lifted the pale yellow knitted blanket between 2 manicured fingers, inspecting the handmade stitches with a look of patronizing amusement. "Oh, look at this, everyone," Nia remarked, tilting her head with a thin, condescending smirk that was audible across the entire yard. Homemade. That is just so incredibly typical of you, Ingrid. Without placing it in her lap or setting it among the celebrated presents, she casually tossed the blanket backward onto an empty folding chair behind her like a soiled cloth napkin, immediately turning her attention to a $200 imported French sleep sack while the surrounding guests erupted into polite, approving applause. I felt Devon's small hand slide beneath the linen tablecloth, his fingers gripping my palm with an intensity that caused his knuckles to turn pale. I kept my breathing slow, rhythmic, and perfectly controlled, refusing to grant my sister or my mother the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. But the casual cruelty of the afternoon was only just beginning. During the mimosa service, Nia's close friend Kelsey leaned across the glass patio table, her voice pitched high enough to command the attention of the surrounding circle. So, Ingrid, are you still entirely single? Is there anyone at all on the horizon, or are you just completely out of the dating world? Before I could offer a neutral reply, my mother interjected smoothly from the kitchen doorway, her voice dripping with artificial maternal sympathy. Ingrid is focusing entirely on raising Devon alone, Kelsey. That is quite enough for her to handle. Another guest, the wife of one of Mike's corporate associates, raised her champagne flute toward Nia, and Mike with an adoring sigh, you two are just the absolute gold standard of a modern marriage. Nia, you truly found yourself an exceptional, devoted man. Nia beamed, leaning her head against Mike's shoulder while Mike rested his hand against her back, though I clearly saw his fingers twitch toward his pocket as his phone vibrated against his thigh. My mother's longtime friend Diane patted my bare arm consolingly, offering a remark that sliced through the air like a razor. Some women simply have the natural grace to attract the right kind of provider, Ingrid. It isn't just pure luck, it's about character. Devon sat beside me on his folding chair, his sneakers dangling inches above the green grass, his dark eyes quietly observing every micro-expression and every calculated glance exchanged among the adults. At precisely 2 o'clock, my mother stood up from her cushioned armchair at the head of the patio, tapped the rim of her crystal champagne glass with a silver dessert fork, and commanded the complete attention of the 30 guests. I would like to propose a formal toast, my mother announced, her voice carrying across the lawn with the practiced cadence of someone delivering a sermon. To my beautiful, brilliant daughter Nia, and to her wonderful husband, Mike, who has provided her with everything a mother could ever dream of for her child, a true partnership, an honorable home, and a complete, whole family. She deliberately paused on the word complete, letting the syllable hang heavily over the table like a physical weight, casting a brief, pointed glance directly toward my seat before continuing. Nia, sweetheart, you did everything in the correct order. You built something solid, something lasting, and you are bringing a newborn into a family that is entirely whole. The 30 guests raised their glasses in unison, echoing the toast to the Dunning family, while Nia dabbed delicate tears from her eyelashes, and Mike leaned down to kiss her temple for precisely 3 seconds of rehearsed domestic devotion. The atmosphere shifted from subtle condescension to outright public humiliation during the interactive advice game, where guests were instructed to write parenting wisdom on pastel index cards. Kelsey read a few humorous submissions aloud to the chuckling crowd before turning to the guest of honor. Nia, what are you personally most excited about when it comes to finally becoming a mother? Nia placed both hands over her pregnant belly, turned her gaze directly away from her friends, and locked her eyes straight into mine across the center aisle. The manufactured warmth vanished from her face, replaced by a sharp, triumphant sneer that had been festering since our childhood. Honestly, Nia declared in a clear, ringing voice that silenced the entire lawn, I am just so deeply grateful that my baby is going to grow up in a complete home, with 2 parents, and a real father who actually shows up every single day. At least my child will have a father who stays. A wave of cruel, mocking laughter instantly rolled through the backyard. It was not a collective gasp of shock, it was the easy, familiar laughter of nearly 20 people, who had spent years treating my painful divorce as the family's favorite punchline. Two of Nia's bridesmaids openly clapped their hands together in delighted amusement, while my mother sat back in her cushioned chair with a serene, satisfied smile, allowing the humiliation to wash over me without uttering a single word of maternal restraint. Mike stared intently down at the grass, his face flushing crimson, his jaw clenching as his phone continued to buzz relentlessly in his pocket. Underneath the table, Devon's hand squeezed mine with an agonizing, desperate grip. My 8-year-old son was sitting rigid in his chair, forced to witness 20 grown adults applauding his aunt for turning his father's abandonment into a party joke. My mother waited until the laughter began to subside before leaning forward, resting her elbows on the table, and delivering her final, calculated verdict in a voice that was soft, cold, and absolute. Some women simply make terribly poor life choices, and they have to live with the consequences. I placed my hand firmly over Devon's trembling knee, drew a slow, steady breath through my nose, and prepared to quietly stand up, gather my son, and walk out of that toxic yard forever without causing a scene. I was ready to swallow the insult and leave with my dignity intact. But before I could push my chair back, my 8-year-old son released my hand, pushed himself up from his folding chair, and stood ramrod straight in the center of the patio aisle. He did not cry, he did not scream, and he did not throw a childish tantrum. He stood with his shoulders squared and his chin held high, wearing his slightly crooked dinosaur necktie, looking directly at my sister with the unyielding, piercing clarity that only an innocent child can possess. The ambient chatter across the lawn died down to a faint murmur, as people noticed the small boy standing alone. Then Devon spoke, his young voice cutting through the warm June air with absolute, crystal-clear precision. "Aunt Nia, should I tell everyone here about Uncle Mike's other family?" The silence that followed was not a gradual quieting of a crowd, it was an instantaneous, suffocating vacuum. The clinking of glasses ceased entirely, the breeze rustled the pastel ribbons on the chairs, and 30 adults froze in place, as if paralyzed by an electric shock. Nia's triumphant smile did not slowly fade, it literally froze solid on her face, turning into a grotesque, brittle mask. Mike stood motionless by the mimosa station, his right hand gripping a glass tumbler so tightly that the liquid threatened to spill over the rim, the color completely draining from his complexion until he looked like a corpse. Devon looked around the frozen yard with innocent earnestness, turning his face back toward Nia before speaking in a slightly softer, conversational tone. "Uncle Mike has another house in that town with the funny name. He took me there to play with Aunt Sarah and a little boy named Cody. Cody is 3 years old, and he showed me all of his toy trucks in his bedroom." 30 pairs of eyes instantly pivoted away from my son and locked with terrifying intensity onto Mike Dunning. Nia let out a high-pitched, hysterical laugh that cracked sharply at the edges like shattering glass. "What on earth is this child talking about?" Nia demanded, her eyes darting frantically toward me with venomous rage. "Ingrid, what kind of sick, disgusting lie did you coach your son to say at my baby shower?" Mike abruptly slammed his glass down onto the bar cart, splashing champagne across the linen, and took an aggressive, hurried step toward my son. "The boy is completely confused," Mike shouted, his voice cracking with desperate panic. "He's 8 years old. He watches cartoons and makes up imaginary stories from television." But Devon did not flinch or back down. He looked his uncle dead in the eyes and replied with calm, devastating certainty, "I didn't see it on television, Uncle Mike. You drove me there in your truck. Aunt Sarah made us turkey sandwiches, and you bought 2 red race cars at the gas station, one for me, and one for Cody." My mother gripped the carved armrests of her cushioned chair, her face contorted in an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror, while Nia's bridesmaids exchanged wide-eyed, terrified glances across the table. "Ingrid, you orchestrated this entire theatrical lie to ruin my marriage," Mike bellowed, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger at my face. Devon looked up at his uncle with profound disappointment and said simply, "I drew a whole picture of both houses with the street address, Uncle Mike. It's inside my blue backpack on the chair by the door." Innocent men do not move with the frantic desperation that Mike displayed in that second. He lunged toward the hallway entrance, but Nia, propelled by an adrenaline that defied her 7-month pregnancy, moved faster than anyone on that lawn. She marched across the patio, grabbed Devon's blue backpack from the folding chair where she had banished him earlier, tore open the front zipper, and pulled out the folded sheet of yellow construction paper. With trembling, frantic hands, Nia unfolded the drawing in full view of the 30 watching guests. There, rendered in bright, unmistakable crayon, were the 2 distinct houses, the green-roofed home labeled Aunt Nia, and the orange-roofed home labeled Daddy Mike, Aunt Sarah, and Cody, complete with the exact physical address copied from the mailbox, 412, Elm Street, Marbleton. Nia stared at the crayon drawing, as her entire domestic empire disintegrated in her hands. The 37 months of automated rental payments, the 3-year-old toddler, the secret trips to Marbleton, and the unaccounted weekend absences all aligned into an undeniable, mathematical reality. She slowly raised her head, looking at her husband standing near the back gate, with his car keys already clutched in his trembling fist. "Mike?" Nia whispered, her voice dropping into a terrifying, hollow register. "Explain this drawing to me right now. Explain who Cody is. Explain why my nephew knows the address to a second home in Marbleton." Mike looked at the drawing, looked at the 30 silent guests staring at him with undisguised disgust, and looked at the exit gate behind him. He offered no defense, no apology, and no explanation. He simply shoved his hands into his pockets, turned his back on his pregnant wife, and fled down the driveway. 30 seconds later, the aggressive roar of his truck engine tore through the quiet neighborhood as he sped away, leaving the baby shower in absolute ruin. Nia turned toward me, her eyes wild with grief, humiliation, and unfocused rage, desperately searching for a target to absorb the impact of her shattered life. "You knew." Nia screamed hysterically, clutching her pregnant stomach. "You knew about this, and you brought your child here today specifically to destroy me in front of all my friends. You have always been bitter and jealous of my happiness." I stood up from my chair, my voice remaining completely calm, steady, and clinical. "I discovered the financial records 3 days ago, when Mike asked me to review his personal banking statements for a mortgage refinance, Nia," I stated with absolute clarity. "I confronted him privately on Thursday night, and begged him to tell you the truth himself before this baby arrived. He flatly refused and threatened to paint me as a liar. I plan to sit down with you privately over coffee tomorrow to walk you through the documents with dignity. But when you stood in front of 30 people, and used my painful divorce as a weapon to mock my son, Devon simply spoke the truth he witnessed with his own eyes. My son did not destroy your marriage, Nia, your husband's double life destroyed it." The guests began collecting their purses in uncomfortable, hurried silence, slipping out through the garden gate without uttering another word. My mother sat frozen in her armchair, completely stripped of her moral superiority, staring blankly at the 3-tiered cake bearing the Dunning name. I walked over to the folding chair behind the gift table, picked up my handmade yellow knitted blanket, folded it neatly into my arms, and took my son by the hand. I looked at my mother and said quietly, "You can call me when you are ready to have a conversation that does not begin with what I have done wrong. Until then, we are going home." In the weeks that followed that catastrophic afternoon, the full scope of Mike's deception was laid bare. Mike vanished for 6 days before his mistress, Sarah, who had been entirely deceived into believing Mike was a divorced bachelor, discovered the truth and contacted Nia directly. Faced with an impending contested divorce, Nia called my cell phone in tears, desperate for professional assistance. I put aside our painful history and utilized my forensic accounting expertise to conduct an exhaustive audit of their marital assets, uncovering $23,000 in secret withdrawals, tracing hidden corporate accounts, and assembling an airtight discovery binder that enabled Nia's attorney to secure an extraordinary financial settlement and full custody of her unborn child. I packaged my pale yellow knitted blanket inside a clean box and mailed it directly to Nia's home, ensuring that my innocent niece would enter this world wrapped in genuine, unconditional love. That evening, after finalizing the forensic reports, Devon and I sat together on our modest kitchen floor, eating hot noodle soup from mismatched ceramic bowls while the quiet hum of our apartment refrigerator filled the room. Devon looked up at me with his large, earnest eyes and asked softly, "Mom, are you proud of me for telling the truth?" I set my bowl down, wrapped both arms around my brilliant, courageous little boy, kissed the top of his head, and smiled with a peace I had never known before. "I have never been prouder of anyone in my entire life, sweetheart," I whispered softly. Sitting on that kitchen floor, far away from designer balloon arches and hollow family toasts, I understood that a family is never defined by a ring on a finger or the performance of domestic perfection. A real family is built on radical honesty, unbreakable loyalty, and the quiet courage to stand up for the people who love you unconditionally.